What's going on, shoe community? Kyle here from Does Kyle Dig It, the volleyball focused shoe review channel where we take signature and performance basketball shoes and review them for the sport of volleyball. As always, I'm your host, Kyle, both a volleyball coach and a volleyball player with a very unhealthy shoe obsession. And today we're going to be talking about a shoe that's a little bit overdue, but I wanted to get it out of the way since I know that the second version is going to be coming out here in the near future, and that is the Adidas AE1. As always, if you like this type of content, please like and subscribe. Fresh back from nationals. Hitting the content a lot harder now that it's summertime and I don't have as many coaching responsibilities or as many practice days coming up. So make sure you get subscribed so you can look for that content here in the near future. But without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get into the Adidas AE1s. Now, these are Anthony Edwards' signature shoe through Adidas, his first one. And I gotta say, I was very pleasantly surprised about these, even after seeing the look and how kind of unique they were. I was very skeptical at first, but once I got them in hand and I got them on foot, they ended up being actually, one, really cool looking, and then two, performing actually really, really well. So let's go ahead, and as always, let's start with that traction. Now, as we break down the traction on these shoes, we've got a just classic herringbone pattern that runs the entire length of the shoe, pretty much just a straight V pattern that runs all the way down. Now, as you go down the shoe, you've got these kind of valleyed indentations that also have kind of like void areas where you can see a little bit of, one, the cushioning support of the shoe, and then two, the X-shaped TPU plate that is actually running through the center of the shoe. Overall, I got to say the herringbone on these works just as good as most pattern shoes and performs really, really well. Even on dusty courts or moderately dusty courts, really, really biting well through that dust. Had no problems or issues with the traction on these. One thing I will say is that if you are playing on heavily dusty courts, depends on which version of the shoe you wear. So, spoiler alert, I did like these shoes so much at the time when I got them that I did get a second pair. I originally got these blue pair that are kind of the blue and white contrast. They looked really cool. Loved the way that they performed. So I ended up go ahead and I got this other pair that is kind of like a special edition, almost chrome illusion colorway that changes colors depending on which way the lighting is hitting it. Very, very cool pair of shoes. But that being said, this pair of shoes is more of just kind of like a solid rubber, whereas this is like a semi-translucent rubber on this one. This one picked up a little bit more dust than the solid rubber, but not so much noticeably so. Both of them had dust performance issues on the really, really dusty courts, but because of the way this herringbone is designed and how kind of thick, not thick, but how deep these grooves go, it's a very, very easy wipe. I had no issues, at least, even on dusty courts or even on the dusty sport courts. These things bit through really, really well. They also had kind of a nice little squeak, if that's something you're into. Obviously does not affect performance at all, but it is nice to have sometimes if you're into that kind of a thing. Now, what we do have is a nice kind of heel to toe on these because they are well rounded and there's good compression here in the heel actually. You'd think that there wouldn't be, and the heel does feel a little bit clunky on foot, but the compression here with this kind of silicone and rubber material, it actually does compress pretty well. So not too bad there in the heel. Overall, I will say that I'd say the traction, probably 9.5 to a 9 out of 10. Really, really great performance. Like I said, even on the dusty courts, you just had to give it a slight wipe. Now, that being said, for traction, let's go ahead and let's get into that cushioning support of these shoes. Now, we've already talked about that X-shaped TPU plate that you can see running the length of the shoe. Not super springy, but it does give it a nice little pop back for you, especially with kind of how rigid this material is. That also helps with a little bit of the springiness in the shoe. So I definitely felt nice and bouncy in these. Not a whole lot of issues there. So yeah, these shoes definitely felt bouncy. No issues there. Now, as we kind of continue to talk about that cushioning support, there was a lot of conflicting information on different websites about what the actual cushioning support of these shoes are. There is the one channel where the guy actually cuts the shoes in half and goes into the cushioning support, and he said that these are actually Boost plus Light Strike. On the website, there was something called Jet Boost, but I'm going to trust the actual, tearing the shoe open and taking a look inside. I do think that based on how these shoes feel, they are a combination of the Boost and the Light Strike material. When you actually look inside, you've got kind of almost like what is a nylon strobe board that runs in here, but it's actually very soft, very cushiony, and you have a heel cutout here in the heel, where if you actually press down on that, you can feel a little bit of that Light Strike material and kind of how bouncy and responsive, but also soft it is. So step-in comfort on these bad boys was actually pretty good. Definitely felt very cushiony. And like I said, the heel compression, despite how kind of rigid this material is, was not bad at all. It's not the greatest, and the heel definitely did feel a little bit clunky despite that actual kind of rounded shape here. It's not so much so that this didn't have kind of a little of that clunky feeling when you step down onto it. So overall, I'd say for the cushioning, probably somewhere in the 9 out of 10 to 8.5 out of 10 category. Definitely a good cushioning shoe. Didn't have any issues with kind of like the impact support and protection on them. Felt comfortable on the step in. It's just that kind of the material that they're using on the outside here, it just made that heel feel a little bit kind of clunky for me. And as well on the front end here, a little bit clunky on that step down. So it just kind of diminishes a little bit of that step in comfort on the shoe, just enough so that it kind of knocks down that performance a little bit. But overall, pretty good cushioning shoe, pretty great tractioning shoe. So that will wrap up the cushioning and support of the shoe. Moving on, let's go ahead and talk about that lockdown and support. First of all, from the bottom end of the shoe, you do have a nice kind of wide outrigger of whatever this kind of silicone rubber material is here. So lateral stops felt really, really good on these shoes. And that combined with the nice traction performance had no issues like lateral wise with the stability and the lockdown on these shoes. Now, like I've been talking about this material, you've got kind of like a rubber material that runs from the heel down all the way across what is the cushioning support of the shoe that then comes up the toe box just a smidgen. And then caging both sides of the shoe is some type of like silicone or plastic material that is definitely, it's soft enough that it doesn't feel uncomfortable, but it is rigid enough that it supports your whole foot once you're in the shoe. I did like it. However, it is a little bit heavy. Now, as we continue to move along around the shoe, talk about some of those materials. In the actual toe box here, you've got like a synthetic suede material, and then you go into what is actually some type of like textile or like synthetic textile material that makes up the booty construction of the shoe and actually comes up to the top. Now, you do have the high top and then you have the low top versions of this shoe. I went with the high tops. I tend to like the high tops, and I had heard some people not having as good of a time with the low top versions of these shoes. So I went with the high tops. I really like the high tops, hence why I got a whole second pair of the high tops. That being said, when you come down into the shoe, instead of kind of like the more, half booty upper construction or one booty upper construction, what you actually get are these kind of like elastic bands on the sides. Not bad. It does allow for kind of like that lockdown and one-to-one fit, but not the greatest thing. And then the tongue material here and the actual heel cushioning, when you reach down in the heel, there is nice cushioning pads where your actual Achilles tendon is, but then up the shoe, there's really nothing here at the top of this material as far as cushioning is concerned. But where it matters, there is pads just enough, but the tongue is pretty minimal, not a whole lot of padding to it whatsoever. And then with the laces, you kind of just get standard round laces. I have heard people complaining that you have to double knot them in order to get them to actually like lock in and stay laced. I don't know why people aren't already double knotting their shoes as is. You're the people we're constantly stopping games for to retie your shoes. Double knot your shoes, people. This is, where it's 2025, time to get with double knotting. That being said, I do like the lace combination on these, whereas, these have the basic laces, but, the colors that they did have for this blue pair were kind of cool that they offered in box. So I immediately switched to these laces that they gave me, and it really made the shoes stand out and pop. Love the colors on these. So overall, for that lockdown and support, I would say I'd probably give it maybe like a 9 out of 10. You do have cushioning where it matters, but not a whole lot and not a significant amount. You've got this heel counter on the back that is fake carbon fiber. It's clearly just kind of some kind of plastic material, but it's made to look like carbon fiber. So there's just a few things, again, that just detract a little bit from the overall kind of lockdown and support of the shoe. Great lateral stability. It felt good on foot. It just, wasn't the most comfortable thing because of the way that this upper feels and because of that little minimal cushioning around your actual heel and the toe of your shoe. Now, what I will say is I did like these shoes a lot, but there's one thing about these shoes that makes them so that I do not actually play in them as much. And it's actually kind of like two things, one of them being much less significant. And I'll talk about that real quick here. We were talking about that silicone material that wraps the entire shoe. You probably can't see it on the film here, but in some of the close-ups, you might be able to see it on some of the shoes. It's taking a lot of like scuffing and rubbing, not so much that it's actually like, unplayable or damaging the shoe whatsoever, but it is rubbing it enough that you can actually see visible rub marks on both pairs of my shoes from where they've come into contact with something and it's scuffed that silicone material. It's not as bad on the little honeycomb shapes that are in here, but it definitely shows up on the more solid pieces. So that's one thing. Definitely not a deal breaker on the shoe, but if you really like your shoes to look nice, these might not be the best option because it seems like they take scuff really, really easily. What was the big issue for the shoe was the weight. Now, as I always say, average weight of my shoes is 12.5 ounces. These bad boys came in at 15.5 ounces, almost like full 3 ounces past the average of my shoes. And especially when you've considered how I've been testing a lot of shoes that are coming in under the average or right at the average, that weight really stands out when you put these on feet. I wore them again recently after not having worn them for a few months, just to, get another feel back in before I recorded this. And I got to say that weight makes a difference. Yes, these shoes grip really nice. They do have good cushioning. They do have good lockdown and support, but they are heavy shoes, and that makes them almost unplayable for the sport of volleyball, I would say, outside of potentially setters, or if you're a middle and you don't mind like the little bit of extra weight because you're already tall enough that you don't have to really be jumping through the gym, these are also a great option. But outside of that, I would not recommend these for any of the pin hitting positions. I definitely wouldn't recommend this for any DS libero position, and even setters. I mean, it's a heavy shoe. You're going to be you don't feel it necessarily as much on foot until you wear a lighter shoe. But you definitely are going to feel it a little bit, and having a little bit more of a lighter, quicker shoe that's more meant for guards is probably going to be a better option over these. So they would work for setters potentially, but I wouldn't recommend it. Maybe middles, especially really tall middles that aren't worried about jumping super high, they can definitely work. But outside of that, I don't think I would actually recommend these shoes for volleyball in general. They look great. They don't feel bad. They feel pretty good on foot all the way around. It's just that when there's so many other offerings that perform just as well as these do in all the same categories and then weigh a good 5 ounces less, it's really hard to justify putting these on your foot, especially for a sport that is 90% jumping at most positions. Now, that being said, I do dig these shoes and I would recommend them. It's just like I said, there's a very niche market I think that these shoes are built for, but go try them on, see what you think. Like I said, I didn't feel the weight on foot necessarily. They certainly felt a little clunky, a little heavier, but not so much so that I was whining about it or complaining about it when I was actually playing. I do like these shoes. It's just, with that being said, you've got to make sure you take into account what you're actually going to be using them for when you're playing. Like I said, though, Kyle does dig these shoes, but let me know what you think down in the comments. I know that I'm a little bit late to the game, and we've got the AE2s coming out here soon. I'm hoping the AE2s are just everything that's great about the AE1s, maybe with a little bit cooler looks and updates, and hopefully cutting like 2 to 3 ounces out of the weight to actually make them, competitive against other shoes in a similar category. That being said, though, that'll be it for Does Kyle Dig It on the AE1s. Again, let me know what you think down in those comments. And as always, please like and subscribe. This will be Kyle signing off from Does Kyle Dig It. Have a good one.